Excellent work, excellent work.
Thank you.
My favorite story that, from that you told was, what happened? What did we miss?
I don't know.
I don't know. Was the lasting, when brands hit that messaging right, it can sometimes last for a long, long time. Apple is still using their primary brand message. The M&Ms, melting your mouth on your hands, that was from World War II when they sent them in ration packets to the soldiers. They didn't want the sticky trigger fingers. And
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and even though that's been so many generations ago, that brand messaging still exists. So really interesting. You've written how many books now?
6.
6. If you were to advise people, you'd probably say go buy all 6. But if someone wanted to buy just one and get started, what would you recommend?
Just one?
Yep.
That would depend on what they were doing. If they were going to read them all, I'd say start at the beginning because they build. Although if you just wanted to read one and you want the latest one, I would read the brand flip. I just think it's got more up-to-date information. If you wanted to become an expert on branding, then I would say probably 3 books. I would start with The Brand Gap. Then I would move to the second one, Zag, which has our brand is the only blank that blanks. And then I would move to The Brand Flip, and I would pass over the 3 in the middle, which are more about design thinking, creativity, and innovation. Very important to branding, but if you just want the strategy, the strategic part of branding, I would get those 3. And you could read all 3 in one day because it takes about 2 hours to read one of these books. So the idea is that you read them fast, you use them right away, but you keep going back to them because they're full of rich information. So that's the design of the book.
Yeah, I've heard Steve Krug, the author of Don't Make Me Think, has said the perfect length for a book is that you can read it on an airplane. And that sounds like something you should
Yeah,
do.
that's what I said in my first book. I said this is an airplane book, and I was just kind of using that as a metaphor. It turned out that everybody was saying, yeah, and I read this on an airplane. And then so in the second book, I got my publisher to put it into airports, so they're right there by the plane. And that worked great, so you can always find them at the airport.
That's good, Margaret. Okay, let's get into some questions here from the audience. How do you change the perception of an existing brand? So brands already out there, they have a customer perception, but it's not what you want, it's not what you're designed. How do you go about changing that?
Well, you have to be realistic, obviously, but I think the first thing I would do is set that understanding of the brand aside. I'd get the executives together for about 3 days, and I would say, if we were going to start over from scratch, what would we create? And imagine this way better brand, right? And then I would say, okay, here's where we are now. Here's where we want to be. Let's figure out how to bridge that gap. What do we need to do to bring ourselves to that stage? And often you can do it, but over time. But that's really what I do. And the other way to look at it is we have this business, it's going pretty well, but businesses are being disrupted all over the place. If we were one of our competitors or a new company, how would we disrupt us? And figure that out. Figure out all the ways you could be disrupted, and then do it yourself. And that's what Steve Jobs used to do. He says, we're just going to cannibalize ourselves. We're just, even if we sacrifice some sales with our existing products, we're going to do that. We're going to compete with ourselves.
So a lot of people were latching on to the example you used of Las Vegas. I think it's something we can all relate to. For those brands that are exploiting weaknesses, like Las Vegas, what do you suggest they need to do? You can't just disband your brand, can you?
I think the first thing you can do is start thinking about how can we help our customers, how can we protect them from us? Because if you don't, someone else will just steal them. So here's an example. Okay, I don't think you had this company, but I'll describe them to you. So in the US, when video cassettes were invented, this company called Blockbuster started stores where you could rent a movie, right? You could rent, I don't know if you could rent, I think maybe people rented a few at a time. You had to bring them back in something like 2 days. And if you didn't, they would fine you, or they'd charge you a late fee. So it was like making you feel guilty that, oh yeah, I was bad, I didn't bring it back, I'm depriving someone of this movie, so okay, I'll pay it. You know, it seemed fair. And people brought them back because they didn't want to pay the late fee because it was half as much as the actual renting of the movie. Right, so, but after a while, people got lazy. They were doing it so often, they just figured, I'll throw them in the car. Next time I go by, I'll drop them off. But they'd forget. And so the late fees kept getting more and more, and people got kind of used to paying these late fees until at one point, 30% of the revenues of Blockbuster was from late fees. Right? So they became addicted to their own brand, to their own scheme of this. They weren't protecting their customers against this. And after a while, they had enough movies that they didn't even have to have them returned for a week. But they were making so much on the late fees, they just kept doing it. So what happened is another company called Netflix just came and stole all their customers overnight. Just overnight. Simple. By not charging any late fees. So Netflix is saying, we're going to protect you against those kinds of companies. There are no late fees. And you know what? If you want to quit our service, this is after they went online, you could just stop your subscription anytime. Really easily, you could find the page that says, stop my subscription, and you could start it again just as easily. And they knew by doing that people would feel safe, and so they'd be better customers.
Right. Yeah, and I became a Netflix customer instantly, just like that.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of, so you're talking about some very recognizable companies here, but what about the companies that nobody hears about, the so-called boring industries? Specifically, Leon asked, on a customer identity, how do you tribe in business to business? For example, insulation material for building, something that you don't think it typically that having a tribe around insulation material.
Who says that's boring? It may be boring to us sitting here right now, but if you need insulation material, let's say you're a builder, that could be crucial to your business. It may be very interesting. Yeah. If you're selling to people in construction, how are you going to help them improve their lives? What are you going to do for their businesses? How are you going to protect them? How are you going to make sure that you're the only choice? That gets pretty exciting. It could be very exciting. So I think there are no boring products, no boring brands. There's just boring expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is exciting to somebody.
Yeah, for a purpose.
Yeah, I had a client that sold adult diapers, and
okay.
we created a tribe around that. It's
that would be a very, very clear tribe. Yeah.
Yes, you know exactly who your demographic is. So if you people want to know if you showed Steve Jobs' copy of your book, if you met him personally, there's a lot of buzz around Steve right now.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes, I had. It was one of the biggest disappointments of my life, actually, frankly. I used to live in this little town in Southern California with hardly any clients. It was really tough to make a living as a designer, which is what
And you were a graphic designer?
I was a graphic designer.
Okay.
In a town that didn't have any graphic designers. I was.
It might be. Test. There we go. I hear you.
It likes to be out. It likes to be free. Yeah. So I was in this little town. This is in 1980, and I heard about this company up north called Apple that made something called a personal computer, and I just thought, wow, that's kind of interesting, and maybe that's something that could catch on, And the company came down to a trade show in my little town, and they showed the Lisa computer, and I was just knocked out by it. It was so much more advanced and imaginative than the competition, and I started looking into this place called Silicon Valley, and I just had to be there, right? So And I had this idea in the back of my mind that once I moved up there with my wife and daughter and dogs and cats and birds and everything, that me and Steve are going to be really good buddies. Because he'll really appreciate my view on how design should work, because I saw the things he was trying to do and I knew I could do it better than that.
Is that how you approached it?
So I was like trying to figure out how I could meet him, right, legitimately. Because he's like on the cover of every magazine, it's really famous. He's 27 years old, 29 years old, something like that. So finally I get a chance to meet him because I'm working part-time for a design magazine as the editor of the magazine. And we arranged an interview, and we were going to make a big feature story about Apple in our magazine and all the great design they're doing. And so I get to meet Steve Jobs, and got introduced to him, and he's like really rude, didn't listen to anything, interrupted me, disagreed with anything I said, especially about things I knew, stuff I know about, like typography and stuff. He was telling me that I didn't know anything about it, and using all the wrong terms. And we had a disagreement about what a logo was, and I said, well, a logo, really, it's not a trademark exactly, it's the typography of the name of the company. That's a logo. It's short for logotype, and it comes from Greek. Logo meaning word. He goes, no. He says it's Latin. It's Latin, and it comes from, and it means icon or something like that. It's like, no, it doesn't. No, really, Steve. And it just went downhill from there, and he then started showing me all the stuff he was doing. And he said, and this is our new logo. This is how the logo thing started. And it was the apple with all these colors, which I thought was kind of a big mistake, all these rainbow colors, but because it's super expensive to do that for very little return on that investment. But we're talking about the logo, and he says, and this apple thing is unique. I've never seen anything that looked like this, any trademark that looked like this in the world. It's completely unique. That's why we love it. And I said, well, this is where I had to think. And I made the wrong decision. I said, actually, I did a logo just like that. And it was in all the major magazines last year. You probably saw it. And I opened up my magazine, and there's this winning logo of this apple with a bite taken out of it. And he's like, ours is better. And we got a little bit further than that, and he said, I got to go. I think this is the end. And so, my fault, but maybe it was the right outcome anyway, because I don't think we would be really a good match for each other. So that was, okay, now can I have one more Steve Jobs story?
This is fascinating.
All right, so years pass, and my little business grows, and it does well. And my wife and I move into a better neighborhood, and it happens to be Steve Jobs' neighborhood. And we live about 2 blocks from him. What's cool about Steve Jobs is he didn't ensconce himself way up in the hills with a giant wall around his house. He just lived in a nice neighborhood. Everybody could see him there. I mean, you could walk down the sidewalk, walk your dogs, and look in and see him cooking dinner with his wife. Nobody bothered him because he's Steve Jobs, and you wouldn't dare. But he's very accessible. But anyway, this neighborhood we lived in is very nice. It's a lot of trees. It's an old neighborhood. It's like living in a park. It's very green. But the problem is that there's so many trees that if you're driving down the street, sometimes a stop sign will be covered up by some branches, right? You won't be able to see it, and you could have an accident with somebody. So I was always very careful driving down the street. And I was driving to work one day down my street, and out the corner of my eye, I see somebody walking briskly down the sidewalk, and I thought, this guy's not paying attention, because I could see he had these little white wires coming out of his ears. And he was just looking straight ahead, and I said, surely he's not going to step off the curb in front of me. I was kind of ready, and he did. He just walked right in front of me. And I slammed on the brakes and screeched to a stop about this far from this guy. He turns around, and it's Steve Jobs. And he's all very apologetic, and goes on his way, and I'm sitting there with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and I'm thinking, I almost ran over Steve Jobs. I almost killed innovation.
That was worth it. Two more quick questions here. One, we got several tactical questions. One from Bjorn, who's speaking later today about performance marketing. But Veronica kind of phrased it. What techniques do we use to create our customers? When you're getting into the trenches, you're doing the communication. How do you create the customer?
Well, I think to do it properly, you start with first you identify who your ideal customer is, the one who's going to be very strong and represent your tribe. And you find some people like that, and you let them in on what you're doing. You include them in looking at your prototypes of whatever you're doing. If it's a website or software or it's a product or whatever, you get them to help you do it. So you're getting a customer's perspective, and you enroll them in this process, and then you start from there, and then you identify other people like them and you work out. So it's slow, but it's organic and it's very strong. If you just try to short circuit that process by just trying to blanket the world with messages, then you're just going back to the old way of doing it, and it'll work in the short term because you'll get some customers, but you won't be developing this strong following that is going to support you and grow your company. So there's no magic formula for that. It's just leave yourself enough time. You'll be amazed how fast it grows when it starts getting going, because you'll have something that actually people want. Right? And you have to make sure also that you're very different, and that your difference is something people want. So not only different, but compelling. Whatever you make your main difference has to be the thing that people want. Everything else doesn't matter. You just have that one difference that actually means something. Like Zappos has service, and Tesla has the electric motor, and that kind of stuff. So it's always just one main thing that people can build stories around.
Okay. Final question before we're going to break for lunch after this. We're getting ourselves back on schedule. And Marty, thank you for that. This has been an awesome interview, awesome talk. And final question of the day, yes or no, is Poland a big brand?
Is what?
Is Poland a big brand? Poland, the country.
Oh. Poland. Yes, it is. Yes.
Marty Neumeier, everybody. Thank you. I think that went awesome. Okay.